Thumbs up, tell me. All right. So here's the deal. Look, we named this sermon series what we named it because like Jesus says don't be afraid so many times it's almost like a nervous tick. If you read the Bible over and over and over, Jesus is telling people don't be afraid. He talks to his disciples, don't be afraid. When they're at the beginning, when they're first following him, when they're out doing the stuff that they're doing, they get afraid of, storms and whatever. And Jesus always, hey, don't be afraid. Jesus tells people he's never met before, like people that are just kind of there for the very first time, people just in the crowds. He tells them, don't be afraid. People he's doing miracles for, don't be afraid. I think it's really interesting that when he resurrects from the dead, or is resurrected from the dead, depending on how accurate you want to be, the first thing we're told he says to the women is don't be afraid. This is so on brand for Jesus to say, don't be afraid. It's the thing he says over and over and over. And so the idea that we should be getting from that very simply is that we shouldn't be afraid. Okay, sermon over. We're done. Don't be afraid. It's simple. Look, this is such a basic and foundational and fundamental concept in Jesus' ministry that it actually begins before he actually can speak. I know it feels illegal to talk about this right now, but if you think about the Christmas story, it's all about not being afraid. Let's start with Mary. Mary's a young teenager. I don't know, 12, 13, 14, whatever it would have been back then when she was able to have children and able to be marrying age. Back then, as soon as you were able to have children, you were of marrying age. And so that's where she was. And so a young teenager, who knows how old she was exactly, but she was a young girl who, it's like that Britney Spears song from when I was in high school. She was not yet a woman, but she's not a girl. Was that a reference that was too obscure for anybody? It's the only Britney Spears song I know. It's not true. I know several. You guys would know them too if you went to my high school. Look, Mary was kind of in between, right? Like she was old enough to be betrothed to someone. She was, able to plan a future and be, at some point a wife and a mother and all that. But she had no idea what any of that was yet because she hadn't done it yet. And I've always thought it's fascinating that, like, when God chose a mom for himself, which is what's going on in that story at Christmas, that's God saying, hey, I need a mom for, the 30 years I'm going to be on earth. I choose you. It's interesting to me that he chose a woman that had, like, no proof of concept that she could give a child a life and that she could, keep a baby alive. Or, like, there was no proof of anything that she could be a mom at all. And yet he said, hey, you with no experience, I want you to be the one who raises me. And if you're married, that's terrifying. Just on its own, it's terrifying to be told, like, you're not married yet, and also you're going to be a mother. And so also it's terrifying because you're being told because, like, an angel showed up, and angels are always scary. And then you have all the stuff of, like, the social pressures, and that's scary. And then also an underrated scary part of this is that you're being told that not only are you going to have a son, and not only is this son going to be God in the flesh, and not only is all that, but he's going to be the Messiah, which means he's going to be this worldwide figure, this King of Kings, Lord of Lords, all of that. Like, you're going to be part of these massive future plans that you don't know or understand or anything. Like, Mary's learning in this moment that she's not going to have the quiet life of a wife in a house, a wife and a mother in Israel, living her life, serving God. That's not going to be her. She's going to be at the center of everything. And I promise you, everything we learn about Mary and her humility and her grace, that's not something she wanted. It's not something she sought out. So every part of this is terrifying. Right? Like, all of it. She has no experience. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's young. She's going to be ostracized. She's part of this bigger plan she doesn't really be part of. She's talking to an angel. Every part of this is terrifying. And so it shouldn't surprise us that, like, the first message Mary is given is, don't be afraid. It will be okay. You will have peace. This is all going to work out. You don't have to be afraid. So that's Mary. Mary's not the only one, because there's also a Joseph. And Joseph, of course, this is a terrifying situation for him too, just in kind of a different way. You see, if he had found out that his soon-to-be wife that he has not slept with yet was pregnant, under normal circumstances, like that would be some level of a decision to be made, right? Like maybe he would stay with her. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she didn't choose it. Maybe, I mean, who knows what could have happened? Like there's all sorts of stories that can result in a pregnancy. And so he would have had a choice to make. Like, do I stay with this woman? Do I continue to love this woman? Do I raise, another man's baby? What do I do? Or he could have just left. He could have. It was perfectly within his rights to divorce her. He was within his rights to prosecute her, frankly. But he was certainly within his rights to leave or stay. And that would have been one level of a difficult conversation, like of a difficult choice. Like I know it sounds like it's the obvious choice, but like anytime you think it's an obvious choice till you find yourself in that situation. And so it would have been a difficult choice for Joseph to try to figure out, hey, what am I going to do? The problem was he wasn't given a story that made any sense. He is given a story from Mary that like, hey, I talked to an angel and he says I'm going to be God's mom. So I didn't cheat on you. I didn't sleep with anybody. I'm going to be a virgin and I'm going to have a virgin birth. And if you're Joseph, what you hear is, oh no, this woman that I've paid a high dowry for is a few McNuggets short of a Happy Meal. And it's one thing to have a hard decision to be made, including another person. It's another thing to have a hard decision to be made with another person who happens to be absolutely insane. Because Joseph doesn't think, oh, yeah, you saw an angel. Of course you did. No, he thinks you're crazy. I am engaged to a crazy person. That was not part of the deal when I worked this arrangement out with her family. They didn't tell me she was nuts. But now she's telling me she's nuts. And that leads to a whole other conversation of being afraid of what to do, right? Because, look, if he tries to do the right thing, she's a crazy person. If he stays with her, what does his life look like? Taking care of a crazy person for the rest of his life. What is that, right? Like, he didn't know. That's not what he signed up for, but what does that mean? He's going to raise somebody else's baby and the woman who is insane. That's his life from now on? That's what he signed. Like, that's a scary life. And then also all the social pressure, all of that, that's the same thing. All of that gets transferred to him. All of the isolation and being ostracized and all of that, that's all going to be now his burden to bear. And so it was a difficult decision, right? It was not something that was open and shut. And it was a decision that he was making that was based so much on insecurity and anxiety and fear and not knowing what's going to happen in the future. And so then he goes to sleep one night. And he has a meeting with an angel. And the angel says, hey, Joseph, I get how you're feeling. We'd all feel the same way if we were you. But look, she's not crazy. All that stuff actually happened. She's really going to be God's mom. Pretty cool, right? Like, kind of. It's an honor, if nothing else, going to be God's mom. So you should go ahead and marry her. And the angel says, don't be afraid. God has a plan for her. God has a plan for you. Don't be afraid. That's, of course, just our two main characters. You see about 9-ish, I don't know how long it was later, 9-ish months later, in somewhere in that ballpark, 8-ish, I don't know. Mary's going to, give birth, and she's in Bethlehem, and there's no room at the inn. You guys know this part of the story, and so she puts the baby in a manger and all that. And we learned that the first people that find out about the birth of Jesus are some shepherds. The shepherds, as it turns out, have a scary life. Jesus says he's the good shepherd, and we think, oh, that's adorable. And we see that there's that one painting of Jesus where, like, it's very white Jesus, and he's holding the lamb, and he's just looking at it like it's his dog. You guys know that painting? Like, I swear you've all seen it. Okay, so we look at that painting, and we think, well, that's adorable. Jesus is adorable as a shepherd. And what we don't realize is that there's nothing adorable about being a shepherd. The whole job of being a shepherd is that it's dangerous for sheep because there's like wolves and bears and lions and bandits, right? And also they're stupid and they want to walk off a cliff if they think that like there's grass over there. And so you're dealing with wild animals and dangerous people and stupidity. And those things are just all terrifying. To be a shepherd is to put your life in danger day in, day out, night in, night out. And literally every time you go out in the field, man, I could get eaten tonight. I could get bit and then it gets infected. I could get robbed and, shot with an arrow or stabbed or beaten, or, I could be trying to rescue them from a river or something and I drown. Like, anything can happen if you're a shepherd. It's by definition a hard job. And the shepherds that we're talking about here, they were shepherds in the middle of the night. Like, everything's scarier when it's dark. Like, you might be able to do a job just fine until it's pitch black outside. And so it's already kind of a scary job. They're kind of already on edge. And then the story tells us that, like, these angels just show up in the sky. And I love that, like, they kind of get eased into it, because I feel like it would have, they all would have just, completely died of a panic attack if everybody showed up at once. So, like, one angel shows up and they're freaked out. And then, like, a whole angel choir shows up to sing songs. You would think that you ate some weird mushrooms. Like, you would just think, like, what is happening right now? Why am I talking to this creature and now there's a choir and they're singing songs and it's weird and it's... the whole thing is just terrifying, frankly. Especially, like, okay, we think about, like, Mary is scared of one angel, right? And Joseph probably won. They get a whole choir. I don't know how big a choir of angels are. Like, more than 10? I actually don't know. I think we have big choirs as people, so probably there's a lot of angels. Like, it's exponentially more frightening. And so, of course, they're told, first thing, straight up, right off, don't be afraid. The story of Christmas, which is the story of the beginning of Jesus' ministry, which is the story of who Christ is in our world with us, is the story of we don't have to be afraid because God is with us no matter what. That's Christianity. That is the hope of the gospel. Before we ever talk about salvation, before we ever talk about who we are as people made in God's image, or understanding that we should love our neighbors, or before we talk about any of Jesus' teachings, before the Sermon on the Mount, before any of the parables, before any of his miracles, before any of that, we are told God is with us. Don't be afraid. That is the ground basement floor of our faith. That is the overarching message of everything. And I understand we've been talking for 3 weeks about this now. It's a little more complicated than just one blanket statement. Like, I understand, Jesus says what he says in Matthew 10, and I understand that, like, fear is a motivator. We've talked about how, like, the people of Israel, a couple weeks ago, we talked about how they, had a choice to make about which fear they would have. And one of the themes, if you haven't picked up on it, is that we're all afraid all the time. And don't be afraid sounds nice, but we are all kind of going to be afraid and have anxiety and insecurity all the time, right? I know that it's a little more complicated than just saying it. But the ground floor of the gospel, of the message of Jesus, is that God is with us, and therefore, whatever we face, whatever loss, whatever challenge, whatever injury, whatever disease, whatever government, whatever oppression, whatever financial crisis, whatever relationship blowing up, whatever it is, God is with us. We don't have to be afraid. All of that's true. And that makes the story of one particular person in the Bible, who happens to end up being a saint, baffling. Just like a crazy, like, just puzzle. If it's true that Jesus just tells everybody not to be afraid, and if it's true that message begins before Jesus is even born, and if it's true that the foundation, the fundamental bottom basement of the gospel and the teaching of Jesus, that God is with us and therefore we should not be afraid, we don't need to be afraid, if all of that's true, and it is, then here's a question. Why does Jesus meet a man who is afraid every time we see him? And Jesus never tells him, don't be afraid. There's a man, a disciple. We see him 3 times in the Bible. All 3 times, he's terrified. And yet Jesus never tells him, God is with you, don't be afraid. So one day, there was a festival. And it's later enough into Jesus' ministry that at this festival, which is in Jerusalem, where there's all sorts of people coming from all sorts of places, it's late enough in Jesus' ministry that he's no longer anonymous. He's no longer able to kind of go town to town and meet people that have never heard of him. Instead, where he goes, people have heard of him. Jesus is sort of an oddity at this point. By this point in his ministry, Jesus is famous and he's infamous, depending on your perspective. Because the reality of Jesus is that he is exceedingly controversial, not because of really anything he says, but because of the reaction from the religious leaders of Israel, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, all of those people. And by the time this particular festival happens, the religious leaders of Israel have put their flag in the sand and said, this is how we feel about Jesus. He's a sham. He's a fake. If he's not fake, he must be possessed by demons. We don't care what it is. He's wrong, he's bad, and we would like to kill him. Now, that's the religious leaders who have made this known. This is not news to anybody. But imagine you live in a world, right, where the religious establishment, the people that you generally trust or you are tasked with trusting, have told you this person is the worst person ever. He deserves to be dead. We should prosecute him. We should throw him in prison. He should never be allowed to speak. He should never be given a chance. Do not listen to him at all. Well, the question is, do you believe that? And as it turns out, a lot of people did. A lot of people, when they heard Jesus teach, they immediately put their fingers in their ears and said, we're not listening. It doesn't matter if what you're saying is true or good. It doesn't matter what you're saying is righteous and pure. We are out from the start because those people told us to be out from the start, and we're going to listen to them. And that was one group of people. And so when Jesus taught at this festival, there were people that literally said, hey, he is possessed by a demon. He is all the stuff. It's all these things. Like, we should never listen to him at all. But then there's other people who are at this festival who were like, I mean, did you listen to him? Like, he's the best teacher we've ever heard. Everything he's saying is awesome. And the fact that he's not one of the religious leaders sort of just makes us double down on the idea that he must be genuine, right? Like, because if he was trained by them, he would have come out a different way. But the fact is, he doesn't have any training. He didn't go to their seminary. So why does he say the things he says? And there's other people that say he must be really good. He's either a prophet or he's the Messiah maybe, or just a great teacher. Either way, he's a good guy. And the religious leaders realize that this is going to be a problem. This is actually what makes Jesus' ministry last so long, is they had to get the crowds on their side. And so that's why, there's Palm Sunday, all that, when we talk about Easter, right? Like, they have to get the crowds on their side. And they don't have it yet. But they had just enough that they thought they could get away with it. And so the religious leaders during this particular festival send out the temple guard, the police. And they send the police out. And they say, go arrest this guy. And so the temple guard go to arrest Jesus. And they listen to him. And they decide, we kind of like this guy. In one of the funniest things in the entire Bible, they send the temple guard to arrest Jesus, and the temple guard is like, actually, we just listened to him, and we think he's right and not you. So we decided to leave him alone. Also, we might all get new jobs. We're not sure. So this is what we read happens in the Gospel of John, chapter 7. We read this. It says, when the temple guards returned without having arrested Jesus, the leading priests and Pharisees demanded, why didn't you bring him in? We have never heard anyone speak like this, the guards reported. Have you been led astray too, the Pharisees mocked? Is there a single one of us rulers or Pharisees who believes in him? This foolish crowd follows him, but they're just ignorant of the law. God's curse is on them. Then Nicodemus, the leader who had met with Jesus earlier, spoke up. Is it legal to convict a man before he's even given a hearing? He asked. They replied, are you from Galilee too? Search the scriptures and see for yourself. No prophet ever comes from Galilee. This is a fantastic passage for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it shows us kind of the attitude of the Pharisees. They don't love the people. at all. Like you think, like at the end of the day, when you wonder, like what is at the bottom of the barrel? Why are the Pharisees the way they are? They don't see the people as people they should be loving and caring for and leading. They see the people as tools for their own power. That's it. And so when the people go against their wishes, they don't say, well, maybe what we're doing isn't awesome, and maybe we talk to them, and maybe we try to help them see the light. No, they say God must curse them. They pronounce a curse on them, right? And so you kind of see the attitude. You also see the attitude that they have towards Jesus and the way they keep their power. Because this guy named Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee, by the way, he's one of them. I mean, this is like the most half-hearted defense of Jesus you ever had. All he says is maybe we should like have a trial first. Don't our laws say that a man is afforded the right of a trial? And what the Pharisees do is they don't argue with that. They don't say, oh, this is why we're going to get rid of a trial. This is why we're suspending the law. This is why we're getting rid of this. Instead, they say simply, well, are you him too? Are you one of his guys? Are you also from Galilee? Are you one of his disciples? Are you from Galilee? Is like, are you one of his disciples? I mean, like, I know, like, they kill him, right? So we understand there's a lot of hostility, but it's still, like, it's jarring to see this kind of hostility, I think. Nicodemus does, in fact, believe in Jesus at this point. He's already told Jesus, I believe in you. But he doesn't say, yeah, I'm from Galilee. I'm one of his disciples. Because he was scared. These guys are going to crucify Jesus. They will have no problem crucifying him too. Or just kicking him out of the group. Or just, ostracizing him to the point where, his life is essentially over. Like, they immediately turn on Nicodemus, right? For the mere notion of saying to this group of people, to this body of religious leaders, hey, maybe we should follow our own laws. They turn on him with a suggestion. And that's terrifying. It's not the only time it's terrifying either. Eventually, they do end up killing Jesus. They do. And as soon as that happens, we read that this happens. Once again in the Gospel according to John, this time in chapter 19. It says, afterward, being after the death of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea, who had been a secret disciple of Jesus because he feared the Jewish leaders, asked Pilate for permission to take down Jesus' body. When Pilate gave permission, Joseph came and took the body away. With him came Nicodemus, the man who had come to Jesus at night. He brought about 75 pounds of perfumed ointment made from myrrh and aloes. Following Jewish burial custom, they wrapped Jesus' body with the spices in long sheets of linen cloth. The place of crucifixion was near a garden where there was a new tomb never used before. And so, because it was the day of preparation for the Jewish Passover, and since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. Now, this sounds like maybe a silly point to make, but all of Christianity hinges on Easter, right? I know it feels illegal for me to talk about Christmas and Easter in August. We're just going to do it. But everything's about Easter, right? Like Paul says, if Jesus hasn't been raised, we have no hope, right? Like the whole idea of conquering sin and death and Satan, all of that is Easter. If Jesus just stays dead, like, well, I don't know how we would understand any concept of having eternal life or any idea that he is God in the flesh or all the things that we believe about Jesus really go back to Easter. That's why Easter is such a big deal. And Easter is all about an empty tomb, right? Like there was a tomb and Jesus was in it and we go and then the disciples go when it's empty, right? The empty tomb. It's all about the empty tomb. It's all about Easter, and that's Christianity. Well, that makes this passage that we often ignore really rather important. Because, again, as silly as it sounds, you can't have an empty tomb if you didn't first have a full tomb. Joseph of Arimathea, a religious leader of Israel, and Nicodemus, a religious leader of Israel, these two people, they kind of become public with their faith at this point. They have been secret disciples of Jesus throughout this ministry, throughout this time, out of fear, I mean, we're directly told because Joseph feared the religious leaders. We know Nicodemus does, right? So out of fear, they have kept this to themselves, but now they've decided they're going to make it public. They're going to make it known. They're not worried about who's going to see them because out of respect and love for their rabbi and their teacher and their friend, they decide, hey, we're going to do this. And that act, by the way, from these scared individuals sets up the climax of the story of Jesus. It's pretty neat. But it also shows the fear that they had. Like chapter 7 and chapter 19, that's 12 chapters in between. Nicodemus, in between, has not changed. He spends that entire time afraid of what will happen if he publicly, or really even to the wrong person and privately, says, oh, by the way, I'm pretty sure this Jesus guy is not a guy we should be killing. He was afraid. And that fear is kind of described poetically, allegorically, by what John tells us here in chapter 19, that Nicodemus, the man who would come to Jesus at night. That's the first story. It's a story we all know, right? You might be like, when are we going to get to the Nicodemus I know? Yeah, okay, we'll talk about it now. Nicodemus comes to Jesus, they have a conversation. That's the whole you must be born again stuff. Right, that's like our favorite, one of our favorite illustrations of Christianity is born again Christians, as we talk about a lot in our day and age, and that comes from a conversation with Nicodemus. I love Jesus talking to Nicodemus. One of my favorite things I point out all the time is Jesus talks about how the Holy Spirit kind of gets to do whatever he wants. Nicodemus is trying to wrap his head around the way that God and God's Spirit operates. And Jesus is like, look, it's like the wind. Like maybe you feel it, maybe you see it, but it just kind of does whatever. It's a fantastic illustration of God. Every time we think we can put God in a box, we should remember that illustration. It's a great one. And then, of course, we land on that verse that everybody put on signs and went to baseball games with in the 80s. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, all that. All of that is Nicodemus. That's all one conversation with Jesus and this disciple in John chapter, or not disciple, this Pharisee in John chapter 3. And we're told that Nicodemus came to Jesus and had a conversation with him at night, which we understand universally to mean, well, he didn't want to come in the afternoon because he didn't want anybody to see him. He didn't want to meet in the morning because people, he might run into somebody. So while everybody else is sleeping, he sets up an appointment with Jesus and says, hey, can we meet at 2 a.m.? Everybody else is asleep. I don't want anybody to know what's going on. And Jesus sits there and talks. And Nicodemus ends up saying, we all know who you are, Jesus. We all believe that what you're saying is true. And he kind of gives up the game really early that the Pharisees are not unaware of who Jesus is. This is not about understanding the truth. This is about rebellion against those that might have power over you. And it's clear by his actions that Nicodemus, just like in John chapter 7 and just like in John chapter 19, Nicodemus is afraid. And so you might think, you should think, it's not might, you should think that Jesus would tell him, hey, Nick, don't be afraid. It's okay. God is with you. You don't need to be afraid. That's not what Jesus says. In fact, if you read John chapter 3, Jesus isn't super nice to him even. Look, they're nice. You get John 3:16, okay? But it's not in their exchange, there's some sarcasm and there's some biting of, hey, why do you not know more? You're coming to me. You're this exalted leader. You have all the power. You're a great Pharisee in Israel. Why are you asking me questions? Why do you need to ask anybody a question if you know everything already? Jesus doesn't tell Nicodemus, don't be afraid. And the question has to be asked. This man, who ends up being Saint Nicodemus, by the way, this man who is he ends up helping bury Jesus, which sets up Easter. This man who, it was kind of a half-hearted defense of Jesus, but he does defend Jesus. He's the only guy who does that. why does Jesus not tell him, don't be afraid? And I've thought about this a lot for the last month, right? Like, I knew, I knew we were doing 4 weeks of this, and I knew, okay, week 1's going to be this, week 2's going to be this, week 3's going to be this, week 4's going to be this, and I knew, Nicodemus was looming. And I knew, okay, we're going to talk about Nicodemus, this scared guy who does the right thing anyway. That was what this sermon was going to be. Nicodemus is scared. He does the right thing anyway. Let's be like Nicodemus. And that's true. If that's what you want the sermon to end with, go for it. Have at it. I should put a slide. It's fine. But I don't actually think that's the important lesson to learn here. Because if we ask the question, why does Jesus not tell him, don't be afraid? I think there's only one answer as to why Jesus doesn't. And it's very simply that Jesus wanted Nicodemus to be afraid. Otherwise, he told him not to. He always tells people not to, which means he doesn't want them to be afraid. And so if he doesn't tell this guy, don't be afraid, seems like maybe Jesus is A-okay with him being afraid. Jesus wants Nicodemus to be afraid. And once we say that out loud, you can start understanding why. Nicodemus was in a dangerous place. He may not have known it. He may not have understood it, but he was a member of the group that will murder God. You don't want to be one of those for 100 reasons. Pick 50 if you feel like it. I don't care. If your group is going to murder God, you don't really want to be in that group. You should probably quit that group. You should probably join a new group. You should probably try to stop that group. You should probably, I don't know. But Nicodemus was in the most dangerous place he could possibly be. He was a Pharisee who understood how dangerous the Pharisees were. He knew what they wanted to do. He knew it was unjust. He knew it didn't make any sense. He knew it was breaking the law and ethics and morality. He knew all of that. It's kind of like if you you find yourself at the zoo and somehow you fall into the tiger enclosure. You know what? Nobody's going to yell at you. Don't be afraid. You're fine. Just people walking by with strollers. Look at that man. Don't be afraid. It's fine. And she just walks by. Like a school group. They all leashed together. Kids, look at that man. He's fine. It's not how tigers work. I may or may not have some inside information about the way that Disney works. Because I know somebody who works there. And there's a ride that has alligators in it. Maybe crocodiles. I can never keep them straight. You know what I'm talking about. Big green things with a chompy. So, they're instructed, I have been told, that if somebody falls into that enclosure, the person in the buggy drives away. Because the last thing you need is everybody in that buggy to watch that man get eaten. Do not fall in that enclosure. Nicodemus is in this enclosure with the Pharisees. Okay? There's no reason to tell him, don't be afraid. No, Nicodemus should be terrified. Because see, sometimes the truth is this. God does not want us to be afraid. Ultimately, eternally, God does not want us to be afraid. He does not want us to live our lives based in fear. But there are moments and times and circumstances when you are darn right you should be afraid. Because you have landed yourself in an opportunity and a situation that you are not going to like the ending of that. Sometimes fear is exactly what we need to have. Sometimes for us to embrace God's light, we need to understand that the darkness is really dark. And that we don't want to walk through the darkness and think we're going to land in the light. We should fear the darkness enough to not go down that path. And Nicodemus is 3/4 of the way down that path. Like he's not considering walking on a path. He's already there. And so Jesus doesn't say, don't be afraid, it's fine. No, it's not fine, Nick. You got to make some decisions here. You know what I love? Is that he does. Ultimately, he walks through that darkness and he finds that there's nothing there for him. And so he turns his back and he looks to the light of God and he says, I want that instead. It's like the picked people, you know? They got Nessie and it terrifies them. But that fear leads them to embrace a God bigger than the Loch Ness Monster. Like, we have to understand, ultimately, the end of all things is don't be afraid. But just the same reason you would never watch your kid playing in the street and say, don't be afraid, those cars will miss you. God sometimes says, hey, you know what you should be scared of? It's that car going 40 miles an hour, heading right to you. Maybe look up and then walk over here. You see, we have to understand that we're never a finished product. And that's really what this is about. The finished product of you and me is not afraid. And so there are times, absolutely, when we need comfort. And Jesus is a wonderful comforter. Jesus is amazing at saying, look, you don't need to be insecure. You don't need to be anxious. You don't need to be afraid. Everything's going to be okay. Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the people after the resurrection and the people he's healing and the disciples. But sometimes, no, there's a bus heading towards you. And the guy doesn't see you. Sometimes in the in-between stage from who we are now and who we're gonna be, one of the best companions we can have is fear. A rational fear that says, I don't want the bad. Instead, I want the good. Nicodemus, wallowing in the bad, needed to be afraid. So that way he could be the person that's no longer wallowing in the bad. This morning, in our last week of our series called Don't Be Afraid, ? We talked about it a lot for the last month. We've covered a lot of ground. And our final lesson, maybe not the happiest of lessons, but it's an important one when you find yourself staring down the face of an alligator, is this. God doesn't want us to be afraid, but sometimes we need fear to mold and shape us into the people Christ wants us to be. God doesn't want us to be afraid, but sometimes we need fear to mold and shape us into the people that Christ wants us to be. We're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation. You guys know this invitation. You've all been to church a billion times. I'm looking at all of you. You already know. If you want to get baptized, you should do that. If you want to join the church, let's just talk about that later. Also, the Connect, Call, Cultivate thing. The sermon is over now, and so is the series. So let's talk, or let's sing with Jamie. The song that is not the invitation. Let's do Tonight the Stars Speak instead. Here we go.